So recently at my school, we had to take this test called the PSAT. It's basically a 3-hour aptitude test that's supposed to measure how ready you are for college or how good you are at school and test taking. Since we took the PSAT on a normal Tuesday at school, that meant that all the juniors would miss their first two classes. A normal Tuesday has 4 class periods. Because of this, teachers didn't plan much for the last 2 classes because then they would be ahead of the first two. And if the PSAT was 3 hours and a school day is 7, then we would spend the remaining 4 hours of the day essentially sitting around doing nothing. Naturally, we weren't too keen on the idea of wasting the rest of our day sitting at school doing nothing, so my friends formulated a plan to ditch school when lunch started and drive to the beach. For context, my school was about a 50-minute drive from the beach, and since many of us could drive, getting to the beach from school was somewhat easy. Of course, since I was so busy thinking about whether or not I could go to the beach, I never really thought about whether I should. Now, I don't mean that in the context of skipping school, because I was going to skip school no matter what I did. What I was referring to is whether or not I should drive my car out to the beach. My car is known to have its fair share of problems and be less than reliable, but the idea of going to the beach instead of physics was so enticing that I decided I wanted to make the drive anyway. The principal was well aware that many of the juniors would want to go home after the PSAT, so we spent a lot of time on the intercom on Monday saying that we would have to stay at school after we took it. Now, this turned out to be a complete waste of time for my principal, as students formed orderly queues at each of the main exits so that they could be checked out by teachers. After we all managed to get out of school, we met up at a nearby restaurant to decide who was carpooling with who, and then we set off to the beach. When we finally got there, it was around 1 to 2 in the afternoon, so we still have plenty of daylight to use at the beach. We played football, where I fell numerous times just trying to catch the ball. We also played volleyball, but it was more like hit the ball in a circle until someone accidentally slams it into the ocean or at some kid. After a long day, we ate dinner at a restaurant right on the beach as the sun set. It was beautiful. At this point, it was time for me to take myself and my 2 friends back to our homes so that we could get ready to go to school the next day. Now, you might remember earlier when I said my car was not known for its reliability. Well, after the sun had already gone down and it was completely dark, this really came back to bite me. As I'm driving along, I start to notice that there is a problem with my engine, as I'm pressing on the gas pedal with plenty of fuel, but the car's not going any faster. At this point, my only option is to pull over somewhere and wait for my dad to either tow me back home with his truck or fix the problem, and I couldn't do it myself because I'm no mechanic. But there was another problem. There was nowhere to pull over. You see, both sides of the road had ditches, so there was no place big enough to put a car where it wouldn't be obstructing the road or in a ditch. The only option was to find a driveway or a parking lot, and since I had no idea how close the nearest one was, I opted to pull into the first one I saw. It was a driveway labeled something farm and had a large private property sign in the front. I knew I was not supposed to park there, but I didn't really have many other options. Here's when things start to get a little odd. Only a couple minutes after I parked, a police car shows up behind me in the driveway. I had anticipated that the police would show up eventually, since I had parked on private property, but they showed up very quickly, even though we were in a pretty rural area. The police told us that the people at the property that we had parked on had called the police on my friends and I, and this was essentially exactly what I had assumed, but the timing was strange. They must have called the police the second that we parked there. While the cop was talking to us, a Jeep had pulled up to the opposite side of the still closed gate. An armed security guard stepped out to talk to the cop that spoke to us. The cop explained the situation, and the guard seemed to understand. The cop left, and the guard quietly waited by the gate as my friends and I waited for my dad to arrive. At this point, I knew there was something strange about this place. Calling the police immediately as we arrived, and armed guards driving around in Jeeps, whatever I parked my car in front of must have been something either pretty important or dangerous. Eventually, a large pickup truck pulls up next to me in the driveway, and out steps another armed man who is apparently the manager of the place. He informed my friends and I that I had parked in front of a World War II weapons storage containing loads of guns, ammunition, explosives, and even a couple tanks. Everything finally made sense. The hasty police call, the armed guards, and the huge warehouse on the property. Not only had I managed to make the first poor decision of driving out to the beach, I just had to one-up it by accidentally parking at an armory. Eventually, one of my friends made the ingenious decision to check the GPS to see what was nearby, and apparently this whole time, there was a Walmart less than half a mile down the road. We collectively agreed that we should probably try to move the car to the Walmart instead of staying in front of the heavily guarded armory, So I slowly drove the barely running car down to the Walmart where my dad eventually showed up and fixed the problem. And everyone made it home safe, just a couple hours later than we previously anticipated. And that's basically the end of the story. Who would have thought that a simple beach trip would result in getting stuck at an armory with the police involved?